funding actually is part of this, so it is on the 3 years later.
So,
Say that again?
well, some communities may be ready to rock and roll
Right.
soon. Some may have these bylaws in place already, or some may be able to,
Right, so they should be eligible for the incentive.
yeah,
shouldn't-
earlier than 3 years. Why are we waiting 3 years is my question.
Are we waiting 3 years?
Yes,
Yes.
that's what she just said, and that's why I asked the question.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was I think this was your idea, was to
No.
push out the
Grab the
effective
chair.
date.
No,
So
no,
if you want to.
it was my
Your
idea,
idea, okay.
the effective date of it being, the whole thing being mandatory, but I
Right.
didn't know that we were sweeping in. We can fix that, I think we
Yeah,
should.
and we should be able to fix that. I think that our objective was to not have mandatory immediately, have mandatory, they get 3 years to
Voluntary.
to have it be voluntary. But if a community has its bylaws in shape and is ready to rock and roll, I think we need to be incenting them immediately.
Yeah, I agree. I was trying to, when I suggested that, I was talking about the substantive changes, not the
Right.
carrots. So we probably have to make a specific
Yeah,
reference
I
to
just
that.
want to make sure we.
So, all right, so the incentives start on page 8. And so it includes the prioritizing funding as well as the ability to override restrictive covenants and deeds. So that's part of the sort of incentive
Right.
package. So do you want all of those to be captured in the?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, if they're ready to go, yes.
So, on page 9, the yellow,
Yep.
what is 27,545? Right
It's-
below it, okay.
Yep.
Uh,
So we had a conversation the last time I was here about the wording of this section being
Right.
a little confusing.
Right.
And so I rearranged it.
Okay.
So hopefully it reads a little more clear.
Could you answer this question? Because I know Ellen and I spent a long time together before the break. And how is this section any different than the first sentence of 545?
So they work in tandem. So, subdivision 4 is part of Title 24, whereas then, the section 545 is actually in Title 27, which is the property title. So we tie those two things together.
Okay, so it says the same thing, but you're putting it in two places.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know we had a conversation about on line 11, about the concept of running with the land. And I'm a little, I continue to be a little concerned that there could be deed restrictions or covenants that don't run with the land that have a negative effect on density. It could be like a transfer in a deed saying as long as you're there, this thing prohibits you from doing, you can't put an accessory dwelling unit there. So it wouldn't run with the land, transfer by deed, just be connected to one possible sale. So I'm just wondering why we need or should have running with the land in there as opposed to deleting that phrase.
I don't know.
Okay, so this was something that was given over to you by the agency? They'll have them,
Yes.
okay, well, that's,
Did the bankers raise some questions regarding subsection 4 as it was written before, regarding the deed covenants and restrictions?
I think it may have been more in the context of this one, but it could equally apply to the other.
I just want to, you
I don't, yeah, well, we can hear from them. I think any concern they may have would be taken up by line 6 and 7?
Presumably.
Because
Yeah,
this is
presumably
only
it would.
perspective. And it doesn't make sense, quite frankly, in my mind, some of this language is almost, how should I put it, unnecessary, because if you pass a bylaw and you start putting covenants in your deeds that are contrary to the bylaw, they're in some ways illegal, but this specifically says it and it can't be enforced. So I think it's, in some ways, both of these sections are belt and suspenders, but as long as it's perspective only, then I don't think you're dealing with taking the property or rights. But certainly we can hear from, if we don't get to them today, we can have hallway conversations before tomorrow on that, if they have some alternative language. And we'll hear from the agency on this running with the land.
And Ellen, would you be kind enough to just point me, the conserved land concern I had, that's, because I'm finding this sort of dense to read and get any, okay, so it's on 17 and 18, I see it.
17 and 18.
Yep, so thanks, I found it myself. All right.
And the following one protects that housing
Yeah,
subsidy.
yeah, got it. And then we go into the Act 250 exemption.
Yeah, did you wanna move on to
Yeah.
the next change isn't until page 15. And this was again, we talked about the language in this subdivision being a little bit confusing. So I just rewrote it, so hopefully it's a little more clear.
This is at the bottom.
Yep.
Right.
So when we talked about this,
Yeah.
I think you and I shared some concerns that with the language of A through E above, this is the situation whether an existing permit has conditions on an Act 250 permit. Is that right, an Act 250 permit? And whether those conditions would carry forward to the municipal permit that might substitute for the Act 250
Yes.
permit. And it says you can't get rid of any of those conditions unless they fall into one of these criteria.
Yes.
And you raised the concern on C,
Yeah.
that may be too broad. Someone can say, well, this law doesn't apply, so we'll get rid of the condition. Meanwhile, some neighbors may have fought really hard for this or something like that, and now the condition is gone. Is this does that help in terms of giving people right to complain about that, or?
No, so I did not rewrite any of the substance of this, but the language in 4 is about providing notice and an opportunity for a hearing. So this is making sure that there is notice given to the statutory parties under the Act 250 process. Right. And so if someone does want to raise an objection, there is a process by which people will receive notice and there will be a hearing on this change of permit. So
On the overall switch over to the municipal permit?
yes.
Yeah.
Will the Act 250 permit be part of the record so they could see what the conditions had been?
Yes.
Okay.
The permit itself will be gone, but the new municipal permit will be added to the land records, and so hopefully those two things should be tied together, at least in some way.
And,
Yeah.
and how will this be affected by the changes the House is making? Well, they'll get reconciled during the course of this process.
What?
Well, the House is making some changes to some of these reviews, or have
We're-
they just
we're-
backed away from all?
Well,
It doesn't matter.
we're not the House.
I know, well, I'm just curious about what's happening.
So yes, so the language in this section is in the House Act 250 bill.
So it's parallel.
It is parallel.
Right.
The language of this
So-
section has not changed in the House bill. However, the House bill did expand the exemption to village centers as well as downtowns and neighborhood development areas, which is what your
Your-
bill as
Right.
downtowns and neighborhood development areas. Theirs expanded it to include village centers as well.
Okay. Is there, just to play devil's advocate here, is there a reason why this section to limit the removal of conditions is preferable to say all the conditions apply, and if somebody wants to get rid of a condition, they should go through a municipal process, like they would in Act 250 if they wanted to change the condition.
This was the original proposal. I think
Okay.
you could do it other ways, but this was the original proposal.
Okay, all right.
Because I'm still looking at C and thinking that if federal or state law is no longer in effect, then how does a hearing held?
Well, there could be a challenge, you know, the town could say, this law was governing this condition, and we think this law doesn't apply anymore, so we're gonna get rid of the condition of the permit.
Well,
And somebody could disagree with that, say, there's other laws that are still impacting, or, so, I mean, we're changing conditions, we're trying to give the towns more responsibility, but we wanna be careful not to change the conditions of the permit unilaterally, town changing. If we could have a free-for-all, where the towns could change the conditions of the Act 250 permit, we'd never get this through.
well,
Yeah.
correct.
And so here, it's saying you can't do it, but in these conditions, these cases, you can. And, you know, it could be, they could make a mistake, or it could be done, they could overextend themselves in terms of removing conditions. The town could do that, and we don't wanna.
And I see that.
You know, I think this is a section that Chris could possibly look at too, not you, the other Chris. Okay. Let's go on.
Sorry, I know, forgive me, but, I somehow had thought, and I clearly was, that we had included village centers. I thought we'd included all downtown and village, designated downtown and village centers. We didn't include village centers in here. And would we like to?
I'd like to get this bill out of here. I don't
I
want
know,
to start
but-
taking more testimony. I
But
think
would we
haven't
have
got-
to take more testimony on that?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm just putting it out there. It strikes me as, we'll let the House do that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, fine. I just think, I thought we had.
Okay, this, I remember on line 18, this deals with giving the communities more time to bring their housing, priority housing, preserving their priority housing.
Sure, so on page 18 is the next change, and I made, so when last we spoke, because we're changing because we're removing downtowns and neighborhood development areas from Act 250, that does change priority housing and the definition of it. And so there was concern about how do we preserve the incentive for priority housing. So we added to both the designated downtown and the neighborhood development area a requirement that towns have one of the following things to promote affordable housing. And so on page 17 and then later in the neighborhood development area, there's new language that came from the affordable housing group. And so we discussed that perhaps we need to push out the deadline slightly because the way that the designations are reviewed is every 4 or 8 years, and so we needed, if these changes went into effect immediately, there's a few towns that will be up for renewal or review very soon and wouldn't maybe have time to comply, and there was a risk that they would become out of compliance and then lose their designation. So on page 18 and then later, we add language, hopefully trying to avoid that by saying, beginning on July 1, 2022, any community under review or seeking renewal for their designation status shall comply with subdivisions B4 and B5, which are the new affordable housing requirements.
Okay.
So slightly pushing out that new deadline.
Denise, is this posted online at this point?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so page 20.
Page 20. Yes, so now we're in the requirements for a neighborhood development area. And, so this was the, some of the language from VNRC surrounding, flood hazard areas in a neighborhood development area. So, this was the proposed language change from VNRC, so it now reads, the proposed neighborhood development area consists of those portions of the neighborhood planning area that are appropriate for new and infill housing, including only areas containing pre-existing development and areas suitable for infill development as defined in section 29-201 of the Vermont Flood Hazard Area and River Corridor Rule.
What does that mean?
So infill development is defined in the rule, and so this is just it's attempting to have the definition match that.
So, I know we had questions about rules and statute, but is it meant to say that there's only two places? Well, you use the word including, but then you use the word only. So, so it says the area consists of those neighborhood planning area that is appropriate for new infill housing. And then you're trying to say what that is.
Yes.
And it's only those that have pre-existing development or areas suitable for infill development. So we're letting the rule and pre-existing development control. Okay, those are the only two areas. I mean, wouldn't it be more appropriate to do it in the negative, saying certain areas?
Right, so this is sort of the result of back and forth negotiating, right? So currently the language reads excluding identified flood hazard areas. And so this is an attempt to allow some more development in the flood hazard area, but only where there's pre-existing development and it's suitable for infill.
Okay, I don't remember all the details here, but if you looked at the language you're striking here,
Yeah.
Couldn't you have that rule just come after excluding identified flood hazard and erosion areas as defined? Wouldn't that accomplish the same thing?
No.
No?
No, so it's attempting to capture that it's different in all areas, that some towns have development already in the flood hazard area.
Okay.
So this is an attempt to allow some development in there because previously they were excluded from including it in the neighborhood development area.
Okay. What would be the result if we took the word only out?
Yeah, it seems odd to have that there.
I do think the language could be changed. To be more
Why can't you just say including areas containing it? So, forgive me, I'm sort of slow to boot up here, but are we giving permission then to continue to develop in flood hazard areas? I guess I'm
yes.
puzzled by this.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
my concern.
So why would we do that?
Because it was proposed.
Yeah, but it's a bad idea.
Well, for example, if you look at that mobile home park that we've been talking about in Brattleboro,
Right.
if I were reading this, is this telling me that it would be okay to include that in a neighborhood development area and that you could develop it?
I don't know specifically about that.
I don't
but
think so. I mean, I know.
What would exclude it?
Yeah, I think this is language that was proposed by people who would, I assume, would want to protect these flood hazard areas from development.
I think having all of us having lived through Irene, I think we want to get as much out of flood hazard areas as possible.
I think we want to understand what this says, because I don't
So
understand
Chris
what
is gonna
this says
explain
right
it,
now.
and clearly we've mixed something somewhere.
Chris.
Man, or,
Yeah, go ahead, real quickly, I want to just preface, and one of the things I've said consistently when we talked about this flood stuff, is that this is one area that I really wanted the Natural Resources
Yeah.
Committee to look at.
And they will,
Yeah.
so.
so the neighborhood development area rules or statute was passed immediately after Irene. It was passed before A&R created their River Corridor Rules and Procedures. A&R River Corridor Rules and Procedures allow appropriate infill, like in parking lots and things that are areas that are already developed, that are already armored, that are not of high risk. What this change does is bring the neighborhood development area designation into compliance with current best practices at A&R for their River Corridor Rule.
Which is what Kate spoke to us
Right.
about,
And we worked with the NRC on this. Obviously, they do not want to see buildings built in the wrong locations either, so we came to agreement, and that's the intent, that two different state policies were communicating.
so you're
its
trying to
messages.
sync them up.
Exactly.
I get the sync up. Is there any way that the word appropriate development would be added? I mean, because I get the part, I understand there is appropriate development
Yeah.
in flood hazard areas, but that doesn't say that here.
Yeah, I don't have any strong feeling whether
Okay.
appropriate is in there or not.
So maybe, I'm
Well,
sorry.
I would say it was
catch
worked out.
this sooner.
It was worked out carefully with VNRC, and they're not here to comment on
I
it.
know they're
so,
not, but she has an exciting, beautiful little baby
She
boy.
does.
Which was lovely, it was so great.
And
She
when you
sent
go
us
into
all.
natural resources, can you flag this section that we think it may need some clarification ourselves, and would welcome their ideas how to clarify? I think we know the intent.
No, I think we also, just for our own purposes, ought to know what's section 29-201 of the Vermont Flood Hazard Area and River Corridor Rule is.
Can you bring us that rule for tomorrow morning?
Sure, I mean, that's the definition section of the rule, so it's just having it match the definition of infill development.
Right, and I think Kate discussed that with us, as I'm recalling, but I think just the simple word appropriate infill development, or what, whatever would help us feel more.
But it says appropriate above on line 7.
Yeah,
But if you can get us that
oh, it does.
language, maybe we'll stick the language in here as opposed to cross-referencing the rule. I prefer that myself, actually.
Yeah.
It reads, infill development means for the purposes of designated centers, construction, installment, modification, renovation, or rehabilitation of land, interests in land, buildings, structures, facilities, or other improvements in an area that was not previously developed but is surrounded by existing development. For purposes of farm production areas, infill development means construction on a vacant area within the farm production area.
But this is pre-existing development and area suitable. So pre-existing development alone, and again, I go back to that question of the mobile home park in Brattleboro. Does this say that you could treat that as a pre-existing development area and build there?
It's not in a designated
No.
center.
Well, I mean, if it were,
Yeah.
would that qualify for being rebuilt when we know it's gonna flood? And in fact, we're moving stuff out of
No,
it.
I
I don't know enough about the facts to actually comment, so I don't.
I think we should flag this and have the Natural Resources Committee weigh in on it. Let's delegate it.
Well, I don't know, we should be passing things we don't understand.
Well, we
maybe we'll have
haven't
an
until,
answer by tomorrow.
We haven't passed it.
we haven't passed it, they're gonna make their changes and get them to
No,
us.
we are gonna pass it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were gonna,
No, we're gonna pass it tomorrow. We're gonna vote on it tomorrow, and if they have
Steve,
amendments to what we wanna do,
Got it.
we'll discuss it
So,
with
and I
them.
hope that tomorrow we'll understand what this says, because I don't wanna vote on something that I don't understand
Okay,
and is unclear.
okay. We will try and find that out. Okay. Let's keep going.
On page 21, there's a change. We're still in the same section. Previously, it referenced within an existing settlement, so it just changes it so that it's confined to within a neighborhood development area. And then the next change is on page 26, and it's the same language I referenced a few minutes ago about the delaying the implementation of the affordable housing requirement for the neighborhood development area, pushing it out to July 1, 2022.
However, right, is that 3 years? That seems like 2 years after. I mean, didn't we want?
It's different. It's not the same.
Yeah, so
It is-
Okay.
this
Got it.
change is going to pretty much affect a pretty narrow group of towns, a known group of towns, because their renewals are coming up within that
Got it.
period. So the next change was on page 31. We updated the
The amount,
amount
of
for the
it,
tax
yeah.
credits.
right? Okay, and so we just, voted on the transient thing, so that's gonna come out. I think those are all yours. Do you have any more sections?
Nope.
Okay, could you stick around for the next 15 minutes? I'd like Chris to
Sure.
come into the chair and go on this environmental stuff here, actually 15 municipal permit stuff, walk through section 6.1 in terms of any concerns, additions that you may have.
Good morning, Chris Cochran, Department of Housing and Community Development. You were right, I had nothing to worry about, you were gonna pass this bill and get it done. Thank you.
We are.
Yes.
The more we live with it, the more questions we have.
If
Maybe
I
that's
could,
dangerous.
I think we're supposed to be in natural resources in like 15
11,
minutes.
yeah.
So I just wanted to just flag a few things,
Right.
and then if we can get into some of the specific questions.
Yeah.
One thing that we missed when we recommended adding, we talked about the flood mitigation credits. There's a reference in the tax credit section that talks about just limiting the benefit to FEMA flood hazard area. That should also include river corridors, to be consistent with the change in the made in the intersection. Does that make sense to you?
That, I mean,
Gonna need more pages.
Yeah, I can get you the specific item.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a technical.
It's a technical change.
that's a
Okay.
technical
important
syncing
to
up.
qualify projects within
Right.
your, the whole background on it is FEMA's flood hazard irregular, their maps are not published online consistently.
Okay.
The River
Right.
Corridors is a statewide digital layer
Okay.
And it's
that we can
consistent.
make people look at the map and figure out if they qualify.
Okay,
or not.
so work with Ellen to get that into the next draft, please.
The short-term rental housing report,
Right?
we, as you know, we collected a lot of data. Our housing needs assessment will be coming out pretty soon. I think it's gonna answer some of the questions you have there. My preference, given limited time and resources the state has, was to actually give communities some tools and resources to help them manage short-term rental issues if it is a problem in their community. I'd much rather see language that directs the department to provide, the department and regional planning commissions, guidance to help
That's what I'm just trying to
municipalities.
find where we are in this draft with our
That's
short
toward the very end, it's the short-term rental report.
Okay, so we haven't gotten to that yet. I have some concerns with your position on that, but I want you to focus on the sections that Ellen has talked about.
Okay. Really, the tax credits is the only change that I have, that we missed. Other changes, we reviewed them this morning, we think they make sense. Thank you for your support, and I think
Okay.
we're in a pretty good place with them. Josh will have additional comments for the
Okay.
later sections, as will I. A question regarding Senator Brock, your question about what infill would be required, I can't answer that. I just, if there's two buildings, a building here and a building here, and it's on a river, what A&R's river corridor procedure allows you to do is put another building within the setback of that area. It has to be raised to above the floodplain elevation, so if it does get wet, people won't be harmed. But it does allow infill, because an infill in that situation isn't gonna make flooding any worse in that community downstream. So that's the intent. We haven't looked at how this would play out in a mobile home park specifically,
Well,
but that's the
whole
premise.
issue,
of
because
it.
infill it's or infill.
Right.
Existing is as written.
Right.
And so would it, would it allow, for all intents and purposes, the rehabilitation of an existing building in floodplain? Would allow it to be sort of rebuilt
Right.
as opposed to filled in?
It would allow it to be rebuilt, and our presumption is that we're providing these tax credits to them, so when they make these improvements, they will make the building more flood safe.
Is there a requirement that they make it more flood safe?
We don't. Well, it may be required in the community, that gets too complicated.
Well, I guess the question is, are we tax subsidizing something that's going to wash away in the next flood? That's my concern.
We hope not.
That we know about.
Our communities aren't really gonna be moving anytime soon. We've got huge infrastructure investments in them. I think the strategic way for Vermont to respond to a changing climate is to make these incremental changes to make their communities safer. Communities do make these changes. Often when buildings are built, they have to meet newer requirements, what we're saying, but there's an exemptions for many existing buildings because they're historic and they're listed on the National Register. So how do we get that, slice of buildings improved? And that's the intent of these incentives.
Right.
I understand.
Okay. I did have one question on, this is for Ellen as well. I don't know if this is your section or whatever, but on page 4 where it says, nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit a bylaw that regulates short-term rentals distinctly from other residential units. And then later on in the bill, we talk about that you can't pass a bylaw that would, for short-term rentals, that would wind up encouraging the displacement of long-term permanent housing. And I was just wondering if those two sections are inconsistent.
And why, yes.
Well,
Do we need this here?
you may not need it here.
I don't.
You may not. This is specifically the ADU section to enable the regulation.
Oh, this section is not the ADU section.
Well, on page 4, line 10,
Well, maybe it is.
It is accessory dwelling
is the
units.
ADU section.
It is the ADU section, right?
You subsequently added a more global change to the chapter that says municipalities may regulate
Right.
short-term rentals. So
Okay.
it doesn't
So
hurt for them
maybe-
to be in both places,
Yeah.
but
Can we take a look, Ellen, at maybe striking line 10?
Okay.
That would be striking all of little sub 2.
So, okay, so you had written, I thought I saw in your notes, oh no, I wanted to ask you a question that was raised earlier this morning on the running with the land. Apparently that's your language.
yeah, and
What page are we on again?
Page 9.
yeah, this came up in Ellen's. I'm afraid I don't have a great answer to that. I presume it's just running with the title and in the land records, but I did not draft it. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. I haven't.
Who did draft it?
Our attorney.
Okay, could you talk to your attorney?
We don't. She's left us. We don't have an attorney right now, so I can't. So I think we're gonna have to rely on your attorney.
Okay.
A vacancy?
Yes, we've been in without an attorney for some months now. It's been fun.
Wow. The things you could do, the places you could go.
We've relied on the kindness of strangers in many cases.
Well, it's a good thing you're in session. You can rely on.
I mean, I think that needs to go for the reasons I said. I mean, you could have something you could sell to a party, they could live there for 50 years, and
Right,
you
and
could have
there could be
violations over,
terms. Yeah.
inconsistent with the bylaws. Okay,
You may want to talk to, a title lawyer.
Okay.
They would have actually good information on that. This is not something I can answer.
okay, well, we do have a few more minutes before you have to go, so we'll take advantage of that. And I know is David here?
No.
He's been sticking his head in and out.
Is that?
He's been
Okay.
checking in and out when you want him to.
Yes, please,
Okay.
yeah. So, we're gonna move on to.
So we're
Okay, so you had you were about to embark on thing, cut you off because I wanted to deal with the environmental stuff first. Okay, on the study on,
So we're past we're cut, just,
are
we're
you
getting
talking
rid
about the
of
statewide housing study on page?
With the short-term
34?
housing study on
page 36 and 37, I think
Okay.
is where we are, short-term rentals. Bottom of page 36, top of page 37.
yeah.
Okay,
And I understand, I understand the concern and the need for data on this.
We thought you were close to finishing this.
We have to work with many partners, AHS and others, before we can release our housing needs assessment. There is some information on short-term rentals.
Right.
We also did, the tourism office did a big study with Inutopia that scraped a lot of the short-term rental data. We have a big pile of data, but the analysis for it is not something we can do quickly. So we do have information, so I don't think any emergency rules are needed for us to gather data. We have it. The challenge with the short-term rental data, from my opinion, is we don't know what the baseline is. We don't know the universe of rental properties out there, and it's a very fluid market. So without an ability to compare it to like what exists, it's hard for us to report on what's happening in the state of things. We can say this is a snapshot in time. We can, give you some, general ideas about where this is happening, which we have testified, but we do know where it is happening to a greater degree. We do know many communities are concerned about it, and that's where I got to my recommendation. Let's do something to help them now. Let's not study this for a year. Let's give them, you've enabled their ability across the board to regulate short-term rentals. What they need is sample bylaws and ordinance and support and guidance on how to implement them. The communities that are feeling these pressures are aware of it. What they could use is some tools to help them get further along.
And they don't, not every community has those resources.
well, I'm not certain that we need, the idea of emergency rules and to allow you to collect data was to help you in making recommendations and assessing the situation. We have a very fluid market with short-term rentals that everybody across the country is experiencing. And we didn't feel comfortable that we could start coming up with any kind of statewide policies. Maybe there's no need for statewide policies, but communities and other states are starting to get into this, set baseline criteria to protect long-term housing and also promote tourism and all this stuff. So
And
we
health
could
and safety.
we need either a report or we need a study. And we need some recommendations. Whether you need any information to collect on this stuff further, that could be your decision. Maybe we can make this permissive, but it would seem to me if you want to write a quality report, there's going to be information you're going to want to collect. And you might not have the authority right now to collect this information. So that's why we wrote it in a way of saying we want to get the information necessary to make sound policies while balancing the privacy interests of the people who are in this industry. But we need the information. Maybe when this report comes, we've been told several times that the report was coming. I haven't seen it yet, but maybe you'll see it and say, okay, we don't need any more information. We're ready to make some recommendations. We're going to look at the literature, we're going to look at all the other states, and you may come back and say, well, do nothing, legislature. Let the towns do whatever they want. I hope that's not what you come back with.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think this was meant to be empowering, but if you
Right.
also want to add I think part of your report would be, as a result, we are developing blueprints for,
Right. Here's my point. I don't need legislation to do this.
Yeah,
I
you
think
don't.
what I'd rather do is spend my time helping the communities with the issues, giving them the tools they need.
You very well may need legislation to get information from people who are doing short-term
Right.
rentals.
I don't know how much we can compel a private company to share, and that's a question for.
but we want to empower you as fully as we can, is I
Well,
think the point.
this committee has done a fair amount already on short-term rentals, requiring some inspections, requiring tax collections. So don't say that you can't
I just don't-
control this industry, because it's a public interest issue at this point.
I'm not saying I can't control, I just don't know what the extent of our authority is.
So that's one of the reasons why we're giving you this power.
So hopefully this report will begin to set some of the baseline. But, if you want, if you think we would, if you'd like to have an additional section saying ACCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development will, be a resource for towns and municipalities going forward as they develop these ordinances and this work.
Well, we may want to change the shall to may, and if they don't want the authority, well, we're gonna make them do this report regardless.
So I agree on the report. I don't need language to help communities. We're gonna help them anyway.
I know, but I realize, but I mean, in your initial comments, it sounded like you were interested in having that be explicit, or that you were available as a resource for communities.
That's gonna require more resources. We
Yeah.
have $50,000, and we have $350,000 out there to help other people develop the bylaws. You know, you start adding more responsibility, the more staff and
Right.
time they're gonna need, and we don't have enough.
So we have data, we can issue you a report. It's not worth arguing about.
Okay, so you gotta go.
Yes.
I wanna let you go, and we're gonna move on to the other.
And then the last comment I think you were supportive of, at least in your email, was that $50,000, you had narrowly prescribed it to.
Yeah, we're gonna put
use-
that back in.
Yeah, you just brought it.
And we're gonna do it in a different way. Did you see how we did it?
I didn't see I saw your general note.
I'm just gonna say to help with small residential building projects, that whose likely cost
Some
is.
million or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sure. Well,
Because
I
I
really
don't
appreciate.
like the middle man.
It doesn't mean anything, but that's fair, yes. Thank you guys for your support. This has been terrific.
Thank you for your advocacy.
We'll be seeing you more soon.
Yeah,
Tomorrow.
good luck down the hall.
The one thing I forgot to mention was the better places. I don't know if there's a place for the crowd grants.
So we haven't actually talked
Right,
about
we were
that,
gonna talk about that
but some
over
of
the
us are
break.
more supportive of better places than others, so I think that we need to have that
And
conversation.
it may, could fit in your economic development bill. That's what I said.
Yeah,
David,
it
sorry.
could.
One question to you, Chris, before you go, is it would be useful, I think, for us to understand in this bill, what provisions, if any, does the administration not support or oppose? And if so, if you could just put on one piece of paper what those are and why.
Maybe Josh is about to give that to us.
Yes, we've been clear, and I can give you a list. Do you just want, you want to see it?
I want to see it. Again, I don't hope that everybody else will want to see it.
I've given them 95% of what they want.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, we've been, yeah. I mean, we have the 3 years, which you probably don't like.
I'll get you that.
Thanks.